My elementary school speech teacher despised me, so I got her fired. Sorta. I still remember that morning as if it were yesterday. I was only 7 years old in first grade, and the whole world seemed huge, noisy, and a little scary. But that day, for some reason, I came to school earlier than usual. My parents dropped me off at the gate almost half an hour before the bell, and I, a little bored and not knowing what to do with myself, went into the building. The corridors were still empty. There was a smell of wax from the polished floor and breakfast from the cafeteria. I was noticed by the speech teacher, the same one who would later become my personal nightmare. At that moment, I did not know that she was capable of anger without reason, and I took her offer quite calmly. She said, "Want to try making school announcements? Now another student will come, and you will go together." For a 7-year-old, this sounded like a real adventure. I nodded, my heart pounding. It's not every day that you are trusted to say something important to the whole school. When the second boy from our group came up, we went towards the office. The teacher told us to go strictly along the first grade corridor so as not to get lost. I remembered her words and took it seriously. We were entrusted with an important task, and I wanted to do everything right. We made the announcements without any problems. We read the list, wished everyone a good day. When we were going back, something happened that was the beginning of all the troubles. The boy suddenly turned into another corridor, started tugging at the handles of other people's lockers, knocking on doors. I froze. We were supposed to go the other way. The teacher's words were spinning in my head. I felt obligated to do the right thing. At some point, I told him, "If you don't stop, I'll tell the teacher." I thought I was acting like an adult, like a responsible student. But the child was scared, probably not so much of the teacher, but of the possible consequences. And as often happens, fear quickly turned into a desire to protect himself. He was the first to run to the teacher and say that I was the one breaking the rules and behaving badly. Second break, we are all back in class, and suddenly she calls our little group into the hallway. I went out with the others, not suspecting what was about to happen. The teacher looked straight at me. There was no doubt in her voice, no attempt to understand. She immediately began to talk as if she already knew everything. That I was a snitch, that I was a cowardly informer, that nobody likes those who run to complain. I froze, not understanding what was happening. My classmates started whispering. Someone even giggled. For a 7-year-old to be the center of such attention is already stressful. And when an adult, a teacher adds, "You are a loser, and if you continue to behave like this, you will only grow up to be a burden." It's a blow below the belt. I couldn't stand it. Tears started streaming down my face, and I was choking on sobs. She didn't stop. On the contrary, she said she would give me a referral, a disciplinary sheet that is sent to the principal. I knew it was something terrible, and I cried even harder out of horror. In the end, she didn't let me back into the lesson. She said, "Go sit in the hallway. You're not worthy of studying with the others today." When I returned to class, my eyes were red. My face was stained with tears. The first grade teacher, my main one, noticed everything right away. She asked quietly what had happened. I told her, haltingly, wiping my nose with my sleeve. "And you know what?" She immediately said, "She has no right to do this. You will not get any referral for what happened." Her words were like a life preserver. She promised, "If this happens again, be sure to tell me. We will sort it out." At that time, I did not yet understand that this first situation would become the beginning of a long-term conflict. It seemed to me that adults are always fair, that teachers should protect. But it was on that day that I first felt, there are adults who use their power to humiliate, and I am their easy target. By the fourth grade, I already knew that meetings with the speech teacher rarely went smoothly. It was as if she was always looking for a reason to pick on me. But that day, everything began especially routinely. We were sitting at a long table in the cafeteria. The smell of pizza, nuggets, and sweet milk mixed in the air. The noise was so loud you could hear it from across the room. Hundreds of children were talking, laughing, banging trays. For us 10-year-olds, it was a real holiday. You can relax, talk with friends, share chips or jokes. I was sitting next to a couple of friends eating my survival kit. Everything my parents had packed in my lunchbox. Chips, cookies, some chocolate. It seemed to me that snacks like these were what made the break real. I was telling a joke to my friend, and we both laughed out loud. And here she appears. The speech teacher on duty in the cafeteria stopped right at our table. I felt her gaze cold and appraising. She stared at my tray and said loudly, so that everyone could hear, "You think this is food? All you do is chew on junk. No wonder you're no good." My face instantly flushed. My classmates were sitting next to me, and their reactions were mixed. Some looked down in embarrassment. Some burst out laughing. I tried to pretend I didn't hear and continued eating, but inside I was seething. I wanted to disappear under the table. When she realized that her words hadn't touched me as much as she'd hoped, she switched to another front. "What kind of talk is this? You're being too loud. You have no manners or respect for others." And before I could respond, she pulled out a notepad and started writing referral. At that moment, I felt the same hopelessness I had in first grade. More accusations, more public humiliation. Only now I was older and understood that it wasn't just unpleasant, it was a stigma that could ruin your reputation at school. She handed me a paper and told me to go to detention, a punishment where you have to sit separately from everyone else. But instead, shaking with anger and resentment, I went to the teacher who had always supported me in the first grade. I knocked on her office door, And when she opened the door, I immediately spilled everything. How I had been humiliated again in front of everyone. How I had been made to feel worthless. She listened carefully, sat me down at her desk, and shared her lunch with me, a sandwich and an apple. Then she called the office where disciplinary records were kept and said, "This paper is to be annulled. He is not guilty." It was an incredible relief to me. I was sitting in her classroom, eating her apple, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was really on my side. She said, "You know, don't worry. Her time is up. I see how she treats the students. And believe me, it won't last." I didn't understand what she meant then. It seemed to me that adults always protect each other. But this phrase stuck in my memory. Over the next few months, I began to notice oddities. Teachers stopped greeting the woman. They ignored her at teachers' meetings. She was no longer assigned to work in the cafeteria or as a substitute in the classroom. During breaks, she ate alone, locked in her office. It took me a while to piece it all together, but that lunch situation was the turning point. I realized that my voice and my complaints were not empty words, that there were adults who were ready to believe a child and take his side, and that even those who seemed all-powerful and malicious sooner or later got what they deserved. After the incident in the cafeteria, the atmosphere around the speech teacher began to change noticeably. At that time, I still did not understand all the mechanisms of school politics, but it does not take much for a child to grasp. Adults no longer wanted anything to do with her. Previously, she often showed up at general events. She could be on duty in the hallway, help in the gym, replace sick teachers, but gradually they stopped inviting her. In the hallways, other teachers passed by her as if they didn't notice her. If before she sat at a large table in the teacher's room and had animated conversations, now I saw her taking a tray of food to her office. Even the children noticed the changes. We would say to each other, "Did you hear she was eating alone again?" Or, "She's not on duty anymore." For us, of course, it seemed mysterious and even a little exciting, as if someone had lost their power. She became more irritable during lessons, as if she felt the ground slipping from under her feet and tried to maintain control at least over us, the students. But it looked pathetic. Her comments sounded loud, but did not inspire respect. We sat, pretended to listen, but in fact waited for the bell to ring. At the same time, I noticed that some teachers began to treat me differently. Before, I thought that they would automatically side with the adult, not the child. But now when I went to see them, they would ask, "Did she do something again?" And there was no judgment in their voice, only understanding. One day I accidentally overheard a conversation between two teachers in the corridor. They were whispering, but the words were clear enough. "The director has already collected a whole dossier. Yes, there are too many complaints. The parents have also started writing." I didn't quite understand what she was talking about, but my heart started beating faster. I got the main point. The administration knew about her antics and wasn't going to turn a blind eye. With each passing month, she became more and more withdrawn. I remember how at one school event, a spring festival, with concerts and drawings, she sat in the far corner of the room, uninvited to the common table for teachers. Her face was hard, her eyes darted, but no one came up to her. Even at that moment, I felt a little sorry for her. It is difficult for a child to see someone else's loneliness. But when I remembered how she humiliated me in front of everyone, how she threw labels and called me a loser, the pity went away. I understood. This is not a punishment from the outside. It is the result of her own actions. For me, all this was a strange discovery. It turns out that adults can also be ostracized if they behave unfairly. The school system, albeit slowly, works. Teachers also discuss, weave threads, share stories, and if someone regularly hurts children, sooner or later, everyone will find out about it. The silence around her, the empty seats at the dinner table, the absences from duty, the avoidance of colleagues was the first warning sign. I didn't know it was just the beginning of her end. After the incident in the cafeteria, my first grade teacher called me after school and said in a calm but very clear tone, "I want you to write everything down, in order. Who, what, when. Without emotions, just the facts, and give it to me." I sat down at my desk and wrote down on a sheet of paper the dates, breaks, corridors, her words. I tried to remember the most offensive ones verbatim. My fingers were shaking, but the longer I wrote, the stronger the letters became. When I finished, she carefully hid the sheet in a folder and added, "This will go to the director, and not only from you." It turned out I wasn't alone. The parents of two more kids from our speech group filed complaints. One mother recounted how her son came home from classes as if he was squeezed out because they shamed him for every sound there. Another father attached screenshots from the school portal. Passes in speech were given on the days when the child was physically called to classes. It later turned out that she was the one giving the passes, supposedly as a punishment for behavior. The director acted correctly and carefully. First, he scheduled a planned, open observation of her activities. He warned her in advance, came with a notepad, sat in the corner. That day, she was sugar smiling, praising, whispering "well done" for every sound. The director left with a smooth record, positive support, friendly tone. But exactly a week later, the sudden visits began, short without warning, for 5 to 10 minutes. And during one of these visits, he caught her in real life. We were practicing sounds. The boy next door stumbled over a word and she, not noticing the director in the doorway, said sharply, "You're not lazy, are you? Then don't be lazy in speaking. Or do you want to moo all your life?" The silence in the classroom clinked like a spoon on a tile. We exchanged glances. The principal silently made a note and stayed for a few more minutes, long enough to hear her say twice, "Well, that's elementary." When he left, the teacher's gaze darted to the door, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes, not irritation. A day later, my mother and I were invited to the director's office. He put blank forms in front of us and said, "I ask you to file a report. I promise, no consequences for the child. None of the employees have the right to persecute him for this conversation." We signed. Mom spoke clearly and calmly, as if she had rehearsed at home. "My child cannot be publicly humiliated. This is not pedagogy." The director nodded and added, "The temporary order is as follows. The doors to her classes will be open. The schedule will be in a visible place. Passes will only be through me. Escort to the office and back will be according to the schedule so that no one forgets." We left the office, and for a second it seemed to me that it was all over. But people rarely change right away, especially when they are used to feeling power. In the coming weeks, she began to take petty revenge. She would forget to call me to class and then mark me as no-show or send me away early, explaining that the group was in a bad mood. My first grade teacher meticulously kept a log, dates, minutes, who saw me off, what time I was returned. Every time something didn't go according to plan, she would look up, call the administration, and say briefly, "I'm recording the deviation." Rumors about the inspection were spreading. Teachers in the corridors spoke in short phrases. "Was it again?" "Yes, I noted it." Some parents at the meeting cautiously asked the principal, "What about the speech?" He answered in an administratively dry manner, "We are evaluating the processes and making adjustments." But we understood what was being discussed. The open conflict happened unexpectedly in the middle of an ordinary day. My teacher and I were walking down the hallway to the library when she, the speech teacher, came out of the next room. Her face was gray, her lips were thin. She stopped right in front of us. "Why are you interfering in my work?" she spat at my teacher. "You are slandering me. Children lie. This one is lying." She nodded at me. "He needs to be disciplined, not coddled." The hallway instantly became quiet. Two teachers stuck their heads out of the door. The librarian froze at the bookstand. My teacher didn't raise her voice even half a tone. "We don't meddle, we protect children. And if the word lies is mentioned again about my student, the conversation will be in the principal's office. Right now." "Let's go," she flared up. "Let's go right now." They walked past me toward the administrative wing. The door slammed behind them. 5 minutes of silence stretched like rubber. I stood there shifting from foot to foot until the librarian whispered, "Sit down, honey." I sat down on the ottoman and heard only my breathing and the distant ringing of a bell. Then my teacher came out of the principal's office. Her face was calm. Behind her was the principal, another administrator, and the speech teacher, red as a beetroot. The principal said evenly, "You are suspended from working with children for the duration of the investigation. You will receive an official order in writing." She opened her mouth, but the words were stuck. The administrator handed her an envelope. Silence blinded her ears again. That same day, all parents received a letter. Due to the restructuring of speech services, classes are temporarily being taught by other specialists. The schedule is being clarified. To me, this sounded like a victory, but adults called it something else, a procedure. I didn't care what it was called. The main thing was that the doors behind which I was humiliated had finally closed. In the evening, my mother put a cup of tea on the table and said, "This is not revenge. This is order. You had the right to respect, and you returned it. Not with shouting, but with facts." I nodded. It was warm and empty inside at the same time. Warm from being heard, empty from how long it had taken. And the next day, new rumors began to spread around the school. The director raised the archive, found old referrals, compared them with the schedules, and several more sheets appeared in the folder with her case. It seemed that the system had finally turned to face those it was supposed to protect. For the first time, I allowed myself to think that the end was near. But every ending has a final scene, and it had yet to be played. The letter about the temporary restructuring turned out to be a prologue. A week later, the director sent out invitations to a meeting, a round table for parents of students receiving speech services, formally to discuss the quality of services provided, but in fact to collect testimony. Mom insisted that I come with her. There were 2 long tables in the library with a pitcher of water and plastic cups next to them. The principal, head teacher, district representative, and school psychologist sat on one side, and 10 or 15 parents sat on the other. I held my mother by the sleeve and listened. The first to raise her hand was a woman in a formal suit. She called my son lazy when he mixed up sounds. He cried after every lesson. I thought it was good for him, but now I understand it wasn't. Another man showed the printouts. Here are no-shows, but on these days we have photos from school on our calendar. He was at class. Someone told how the teacher scolded the child in the middle of the corridor. Someone, how she forgot to return the children to the classroom, and they missed tests. The psychologist wrote down and occasionally asked clarifying questions. "Do you remember the wording? How long did this state last?" When it was our turn, Mom spoke calmly without trembling. My child was publicly called a tattletale and a loser. There was a referral for laughing too loudly in the cafeteria, which our class teacher canceled. I have copies. She handed over the folder. The director thanked her and put the papers aside with the others. No one raised their voices. The strange, silent machine was doing its job. A couple of days later, the official practice evaluation began, what adults called a committee. The same people were sitting in a small office. A district representative, HR, a lawyer, a psychologist, a principal, and a union observer. The speech teacher came with an attorney and a folder packed in neat files. I watched from the hallway, through the glass in the door, and felt my insides tighten. She was the first to be heard. She spoke about stress resources, underfunding, overload, incorrect interpretations. At some point, she even started crying, sniffling into a handkerchief. The union observer nodded. HR made notes. And then it was the turn of the documents. There were a lot of them. Discrepancies between the schedule and the absence records, the lawyer said, placing two tables next to each other. 15 cases per semester. Parents' complaints. The wording, lazy, don't try, you'll fail. The psychologist looked at her, confirmed by 3 independent testimonies. Violations of procedures, closed doors, lack of escort, early termination of classes. I recognized my sheets of paper, written in a child's handwriting, with dates and corridors. I recognized the apple that my teacher shared with me, in the form of a note, lunch at the class teachers instead of childcare. Each small episode that seemed to me then just an insult turned out to be a thread, and they all intertwined into a thick rope. The teacher began, children exaggerate. They sometimes lie. Madam, the psychologist stopped her gently. We rely not only on the children's words, on records, schedules, letters. The director looked up. In your own referrals, they were systematically written out for behavior that did not fall under disciplinary violations. She tried to object, but she was already hesitant. The commission lasted 2 hours. At the end, HR read out a dry statement. You have been suspended for the duration of the review. Based on the results of the assessment, it is recommended that you not renew your contract for the next school year. You will be offered to complete a program of corrective practices, after which the district may consider an internal transfer. Not to renew the contract? I didn't know the legal subtleties then, but I understood the main thing. This is the end. Not dismissal now, but leaving at the end of the year. Sort dismissal. Enough for her to disappear from our school. I didn't feel triumphant that day. My mother and I went outside, and only then did I notice how deeply I was breathing. As if for the first time in a long time, my lungs had fully expanded. My mother squeezed my shoulder. Be proud of yourself. You told the truth, and you held on. The news spread quickly at school, although no one officially confirmed it. The teachers stopped hiding their gazes. At the last teachers' council, the principal spoke about a culture of respect and zero tolerance for humiliation. In the hallway, I met the librarian. She whispered, well done. She hardly showed up for the rest of the year. Sometimes I saw her in the office window, sitting hunched over, sorting through papers. Word went around the school that she was taking sick leave. I wasn't happy about her loneliness, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. Justice rarely looks pretty, but it is necessary. At the last assembly, her name was not on the list of thanks. The principal thanked the team of speech specialists, and separately my first grade teacher, for her contribution to creating a safe environment. She caught my eye and nodded slightly. In the summer, we received a letter. We inform you that from the new school year, speech services will be provided by a new specialist. The schedule and approaches have been updated. At the bottom are the signatures of the director and the district representative. I reread it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to reinforce the feeling of the finale. And the ending was like this. I, age 7, was once publicly called a snitch and a loser. A few years later, my voice, and the voices of other children and parents, led to the adult who had abused his power losing the right to use that power. Not revenge, order. It's amazing how much in school depends on one adult standing next to you and saying, write down the facts. I'll carry them along. If it weren't for my teacher, I probably would have resigned myself to it and decided that that's just the way it is. But she showed a different scenario. And yet the story did not end with not renewing the contract. There was a meeting ahead that I had not prepared for. Years later, I saw her again, in the most unexpected place. But that was another scene. Years passed. I grew up, changed cities, jobs, and circles of people. The story with the speech teacher sometimes surfaced in my memory, like a scar that doesn't hurt, but reminds of itself. I got used to thinking of it as a closed folder. The lesson was learned, justice was done, and then life. One spring, I brought my nephew to a free speech screening at the district center. He has a slight lisp, nothing critical, but his sister asked to check for peace of mind. The hall smelled of paper, cheap candy, and antiseptic. We filled out the forms, I gave them to the administrator, and froze. She was sitting behind the counter. I didn't recognize her right away. Her hair was shorter, her glasses were different, her face was softer. But her gaze was the same, quick and appraising. It barely touched me, slid further, returned and lingered. Recognition flashed in her eyes, and then something I didn't expect. Weariness. Not anger, not contempt. Weariness. What's the child's last name? She asked evenly, as if we were meeting for the first time. I said it. She made a note and handed her nephew a dolphin sticker. He happily stuck it on his sweater and ran off to the play area. We were alone for a second, me and the man who made my knees buckle when I was 7. Are you from here? She asked, clearly testing the waters. I used to go to your school, I replied, and I saw her flinch slightly. The pause hung like a long thread. I was not going to take revenge or console. I just stood there and breathed. She straightened up, adjusted the folder, and suddenly said very quietly, I was a Bad teacher, then. The phrase sounded casual, without pathos or justification, and for some reason, that's why it hit the mark. I nodded. No triumphant, "I told you so." No speeches about justice. Inside, it was empty and calm, like after a thunderstorm, when the water has already gone and the grass lies flattened. "You can't do that to children," she added a little louder. "I know." I noticed a brochure on her desk called Nonviolent Communication in Working with Children, and next to it, a mug with a worn-out inscription, "Listening is an action." On the wall was a certificate of some courses. I caught myself thinking strangely. Perhaps life was teaching her after all. Or she had decided to study herself. This does not cancel the past, but speaks to the present. "My nephew is being called for a test?" I asked, gently getting back to business. She nodded and pressed the button on the intercom. The nephew was taken into the office. We were alone again. She sighed, a tired adult sigh. "I remember you," she said without looking, "and how it all ended. For me, for everyone," I corrected. "It was right then." She didn't argue. She just nodded. Footsteps were heard in the doorway. A young specialist came out, smiled, called the next one. Everything started spinning again. Questionnaires, name, schedule. We exchanged short, almost official glances. 20 minutes later, the nephew returned, pleased, with another sticker and a recommendation for several games to set up the sound. No big deal. I thanked the specialist, and as I was leaving, I turned around. She also looked up. We didn't say another word, and it seemed like the right ending. On the way home, my nephew chatted nonstop, showed me stickers, and comically drew out "Look, a dolphin! It has a tail!" I laughed and suddenly felt something inside finally click into place. Not because I won, because I was no longer pulling the old rope. Sometimes I'm asked if I regret that everything went exactly that way back then, that we made a fuss, that her sorta was fired, that her contract was not extended. I was not happy about her loneliness, but I was not obliged to prevent it. Children should not pay for the comfort of adults with their silence. And if someone's position is based on the fact that a child can be humiliated without consequences, such a position should disappear. There is no moral to this story in the style of everyone changed and lived happily ever after. People rarely change completely, but there are a few things I believe. 1. Fact is a language that even the system hears. 2. One adult standing by can outweigh an entire pulpit of alien power. 3. Forgiveness is not necessarily forgetting. Sometimes it's just refusing to carry old pain around as evidence. I wrote this down for myself, just as I once wrote down dates and corridors. It helped me survive and stand up for myself then. Now it helps me not to look back. And if my child or nephew ever encounters the same educator, I'll know what to do. Open the door, call things by their names, and keep those who know how to listen close by. My sister now has a schedule of games for R on her refrigerator. On my shelf is a book about that same nonviolent communication. And somewhere in the regional center, the woman behind the counter is probably learning to talk to children differently. This is neither my victory nor her defeat. It is simply a world that has shifted a millimeter toward the human.